Amelia Elizabeth Hobley Dyer, 1837 to 1896, infamously known as the Ogress of Reading, was a Victorian-era nurse turned baby farmer whose devastating crimes spanned nearly 3 decades. Exploiting the desperate circumstances of unmarried and impoverished mothers, she charged substantial fees to care for infants, initially providing genuine nurture before descending into systematic infanticide. Operating under various aliases and frequently relocating, Dyer perfected a chilling modus operandi: strangle her charges with white edging tape, wrap their bodies in parcels, and dispose of them in rivers or remote locations. Though only 6 murders were officially confirmed at her 1896 arrest, contemporary investigators have attributed as many as 200 to 400 infant deaths to her actions. Her sensational trial at the Old Bailey and execution at Newgate Prison on 10th of June 1896 precipitated landmark reforms in British child welfare, including the Infant Life Protection Acts, and galvanized the nascent National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. Dyer's case remains a haunting exemplar of how societal stigma and regulatory failures can enable unfathomable cruelty. Early life and personal background. Born in 1837 in the small village of Pyle Marsh near Bristol, Amelia Elizabeth Hobley was the youngest of 5 children to shoemaker Samuel Hobley and his wife Sarah Weymouth. Her formative years were marred by tragedy. Her mother succumbed to typhus when Amelia was only 11, and her family later endured bouts of mental illness and financial hardship. Despite these adversities, Amelia demonstrated academic promise, learning to read and write at an early age, skills that would later lend an air of respectability to her caregiving persona. In her early 20s, Amelia apprenticed with a local corset maker before pursuing formal nursing training, a highly regarded profession for women of her era. After marrying George Thomas in 1861, she bore a daughter, Ellen Polly Thomas. Thomas's death in 1869 left Amelia widowed and financially precarious, prompting her to marry William Dyer a few years later. Widowed once again in 1872, Amelia faced limited employment options. Nursing offered stability, but caring for infants through private arrangements, commonly called baby farming, presented an even more lucrative opportunity. The context of baby farming in Victorian Britain. By the mid-19th century, England's rapidly industrializing society grappled with stark social inequalities and punitive attitudes toward illegitimacy. Unwed mothers and impoverished families faced intense stigma, and public welfare provisions were minimal. Into this void stepped baby farmers who offered to adopt or foster unwanted infants in exchange for one-time or recurring payments. Fees varied widely, from modest sums of around £5 for impoverished women to as much as £80 to ensure secrecy for families of higher social standing. While some baby farmers provided compassionate care, the unregulated nature of the trade created perverse incentives. Carers often resorted to neglect, starvation, or sedation with opiates such as Godfrey's Cordial, Mother's Friend, to reduce costs, or in more extreme cases, to hasten death. Infant mortality rates in baby farms were alarmingly high, but few authorities scrutinized individual carers until clusters of unexplained deaths garnered public attention. Descent into murder, modus operandi, and scale. Amelia Dyer's initial foray into baby farming appears to have been legitimate. She fostered children, including 2 of her own, and maintained a modest home. However, a series of infant fatalities in her care culminated in an 1879 conviction for neglect, resulting in a 6-month hard labor sentence. Undeterred and perhaps emboldened by the lenient penalty, Dyer returned to the trade with a chilling calculus. Immediate infanticide maximized profits and eliminated the burden of ongoing care. Over the next decade and a half, Dyer refined her techniques. She adopted pseudonyms, most commonly Mrs. Thomas, and relocated frequently between Bristol, Reading, and other towns. Accompanied by an elderly accomplice, Jane Granny Smith, she courted trust from desperate parents, collected fees up front, and then dispatched her young victims. Many were strangled with white edging tape, wrapped in paper parcels, and discarded into the Thames or buried in secluded areas. The use of lightweight materials often allowed bodies to resurface, leading to dozens of infant corpses washing ashore. Although law enforcement officially linked 6 murders to Dyer by 1896, contemporary researchers and archival evidence suggest her true toll may have ranged between 200 and 400 infants. This staggering victim count arguably makes her one of history's most prolific serial killers. Discovery, investigation, and arrest. The unraveling of Dyer's reign of terror began on 30th of March 1896, when a bargeman fishing near Caversham Loch in the River Thames hauled up a brown paper parcel containing the body of a recently strangled infant. Detective Constable Thomas Anderson of the Reading Borough Police examined the binding tape and telegram fragments wrapped with the corpse, tracing them to a Mrs. Thomas, residing at 45 of Kensington Road, Reading. On the Good Friday, 3rd April 1896, plainclothes officers posing as prospective clients arrested Dyer. Her rented home reeked of decay. Though few remains were found, Dyer had destroyed evidence. Authorities seized correspondence, telegrams, and white tape consistent with the crime. A subsequent dredging operation in the Thames recovered 6 additional infant corpses, including those of Doris Marman and Harry Simmons, cementing the case for murder charges. Trial at the Old Bailey. Amelia Dyer's trial commenced at the Old Bailey in May 1896. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of murder of Doris Marman, but entered an insanity defense for the remainder of the charges. The prosecution dismantled her claim by highlighting Dyer's pattern of asylum admissions, conveniently timed feigned breakdowns aimed at evading scrutiny. After just 4.5 minutes of jury deliberation, Dyer was found guilty. Her daughter Polly, initially viewed as a potential accomplice, was controversially questioned but ultimately never charged. Execution and final moments. Sentenced to death, Dyer was held in Newgate Prison's condemned cell, where she authored 5 confessional exercise book notebooks. On the morning of 10th of June 1896, at precisely 9 a.m., executioner James Billington conducted her hanging. Reports note that as she ascended the steps, Dyer offered no final words beyond, "I have nothing to say," displaying a chilling composure that matched her calculated crimes. Aftermath. Reform and the rise of child welfare movements. Public revulsion at the scale and nature of Dyer's atrocities for reform. Although the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, NSPCC, had been founded in 1884, Dyer's case galvanized its mission, spurring expanded powers for child welfare inspections. Parliament swiftly enacted the Infant Life Protection Act of 1897, mandating registration, inspection, and oversight of anyone taking infants for payment. A follow-up statute in 1900 tightened regulations further, empowering local authorities to prosecute unlicensed caregivers. These legal frameworks laid the groundwork for modern child protection systems and underscored the necessity of state oversight in private caregiving arrangements. Baby farming as an institution gradually declined over the early 20th century, though isolated abuses persisted. Cultural legacy and modern reflections. Amelia Dyer's crimes have left an indelible imprint on British cultural memory. Broadside ballads of the era labeled her the Ogress of Reading, and her likeness once hung in Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors. Scholarly analyses, such as Gresham College lectures and academic monographs, probe the intersections of gender, poverty, and social policy illuminated by her case. Exhibits like Sussex's True Crime Museum periodically display artifacts linked to Dyer, ensuring her story endures in public consciousness. Contemporary true crime media, from books like The Baby Farm Murders to podcast episodes on BBC Radio 4, continue to revisit Dyer's narrative, often framing it as a cautionary tale about regulatory neglect and societal indifference to vulnerable populations. In an age increasingly aware of institutional failures, her legacy resonates as a stark reminder of the human cost when profit is placed above compassion. Page 1, Page 2, Page 4.